Hello, good evening. I love when the lights go down and we're such a professional crowd that we're like, shh, I'm gonna shut up in a moment, the show going to start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Green Space, where we channel the collective wisdom and genius of New York City to create forward-looking live art, theater, and journalism that sparks curiosity and change. And we've been doing this for over 13 years, right here as part of New York Public Radio, WNYC, WQXR, and there's so many others, but we can't get into that tonight. We are a complex, wonderful organization. Tonight, we are here to celebrate every voice with Terrance McKnight, and you're in for a wonderful program. But before that, I'm going to tell you very briefly about a few things coming up with Green Space. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you go, find us. So here are the things that are coming up. March 13th. The Civilians, do you know about the Civilians, this theater group? They are the bomb. The person behind the post, I can't see you, but thank you. That was very supportive. They're gonna be doing 3 performances with us, and I'm very excited and a little nervous about the first one because they're working with ChatGPT, you know this new thing, ChatGPT. They're gonna do live interactive improv with all y'all with ChatGPT. Buy your tickets, March 13th, okay? Give a donation. March 17th, we have drag performer Thorgy Thor, who you might know from RuPaul's Drag Race or Mozart in the Jungle. She's phenomenal. And she's gonna be celebrating Women's History Month by highlighting female-identified musicians and composers. So we're gonna have folks from Palabalas, it's gonna be great, and Grammy Award-winning Catalyst Quartet, and more. So those are just 2 of the many things, so please go to greenspace.org to learn more. But on with the program. I'm about to introduce you. Some of you just met him. He's wonderful. Some of you might know him already. We're very excited. And he's here with his lovely wife, Denise. Our new president and CEO, LaFontaine Oliver. Let me tell you a little bit about LaFontaine. He has worked in radio his whole career. So, you know, he didn't drop from like a corporate place and was like, here what we gonna do. Because you know that's real and it happens. But we are so blessed. Whatever prayers we did, they were answered because LaFontaine understands this work from the inside out. He is a veteran radio leader and public radio leader, and he is coming in at an important part in our journalistic journey, like, you know, all the things that are happening. I don't want to tell you all, you're all seeing it, but we're feeling very hopeful, excited, and I'm thrilled to introduce him to you and for you all to get to know him because he is a community-based leader at his core, which is so important. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our new president and CEO, LaFontaine Oliver.
I have said this before, and I mean it. Christina, I'm taking you with me everywhere to introduce me. Put a note down, I don't want an introduction from anyone else other than Christina. Hello, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you this evening. We have a wonderful program in store for you, a conversation between WQXR host Terrance McKnight and WNYC host Kai Wright, two brilliant men who are both in the business of rewriting history, or perhaps a better way to say it is writing some of our stories back into history where it belongs. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let me just say, for those of you who I have not had the pleasure to meet, I'm LaFontaine Oliver, the new CEO of New York Public Radio. I told folks earlier, I think I'm on day 47 and still counting, and I'm as excited as I was on day one. I want to take an opportunity to give a few thanks off top just to get us started. Ed Yim and Elizabeth Nunemaker and the QXR team for just being brilliant and just helping to put all of this together. Would you give a round of applause for them, please? Of course, leadership support for programming in the Greene space is provided by the Jerome L. Greene Foundation. We are also grateful to our WQXR supporters, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council, the Howard Gilman Foundation, and the Carson Family Charitable Trust, the Robert and Mercedes Eikos Foundation, and the Thompson Family Foundation as well. And last but certainly not least, Every Voice with Terrance McKnight is supported in part by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And of course, we have to thank all of you for being here tonight. So who among us is visiting the Greene space for the first time? Can I see? Oh, wow. That is wonderful. So let me just tell you a special welcome to you all. As they would often say in the black church, don't make this the first visit your last visit. We want to see your face in the place again. So, but I think you're going to love this space. It is a very intimate venue where you get to see programming that you aren't going to see anywhere else in the city. So I am glad of all of the places you could have chosen to spend your time this evening. You've decided to do that with us here this evening. So, and tonight, we are here in this space for the launch of WQXR's new podcast, Every Voice with Terrance McKnight. Every Voice embodies WQXR's mission to take classical music beyond the concert hall and to make it available, accessible, and relevant in New York and beyond, and they are doing that in a big way. Classical music has many barriers to entry, as you may know. At WQXR, we believe that the music belongs to everyone. We also know that it can be loved, it can be challenged, appreciated, and interrogated all at the same time. And you're going to get some of that, I suppose, this evening. WQXR's commitment to overcoming those barriers is deep, and it includes a few things I want to run off for you. So the Artist Propulsion Lab, a program that gives a diverse roster of classical music artists the space and platform to create original work, to collaborate, and to connect with new audiences. I had the pleasure in a board meeting just yesterday to hear one of those artists, and it was soul-stirring. I told folks in the meeting, if you didn't feel something, you do not have a pulse after that. There's the Kids Fair, hosted around the 5 boroughs, where we bring the joy of classical music to the next generation of listeners. And of course, our suite of WQXR podcasts, which bring fresh takes on classical music and how it connects to our lives, our shared history, and to listeners around the globe. So tonight, We are celebrating the launch of Every Voice with Terrance McKnight. If you don't know Terrance's work already, he's our host of weeknights broadcast, and he produces stellar documentaries of underappreciated greats like Hazel Scott, Florence Price, and George Walker. That's right. He's also taking fascinating dives into the relationship of luminaries like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Langston Hughes and their connections to classical music. On Every Voice, Terrance uses his prodigious talent to continue this work of expanding classical music and opera's canon and unearthing untold stories. And tonight also, you're going to hear from Kai Wright. He's going to be joining Terrance on his weekly radio program, Notes from America, which I hope you are all listening to every week. The listeners are taken on a journey to look at unfinished business of our history and how it grips us to our future. He's shining a light on the people who are realizing our nation's promises and multiracial democracy. Shows like these two and the program that we're putting on tonight are the reason why I'm so happy to be here as the new head of New York Public Radio. There is nothing I enjoy more than having the opportunity in real life to connect with our audience, something that we don't get an opportunity to do as much as we would like. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your support of WQXR and our wonderful programs. And I know you're going to enjoy the show. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Terrance and to Kai. Thank you all so much.
LaFontaine, thank you so much for setting us up. We are excited to be here tonight to celebrate the new podcast, Every Voice with Terrance McKnight. That was the theme music that you were listening to that we were coming out to. We're going to hear a lot of great music tonight and a lot of great music in this podcast, but some of it quite complicated. And one of the first things that is clear, Terrance, when, from the very beginning of episode 1, is how personal this podcast is going to be, and how much you can just hear how much at stake you have in the conversation. And I wonder if we can start there and talk about that. Like, what does this mean to you to be telling this story?
Oh, it means so much to see some of my friends here today. That means a lot. Some familiar faces. Thanks for coming out, you all, tonight. Hey, Matt. It's, Ivan, is that you? Yeah, that's you, too. I could just go down the list. I start, the first episode of the show started with a very personal story, talking about my father. I don't know if you all heard this, but my pops used to come home every evening, and if I wasn't practicing piano or playing my trumpet, then I was fair game for whatever he wanted me to do. So if I heard his car coming in the driveway, I would run to my piano just to save myself from doing some chores. I want you all to hear this. I think we got a clip of the story that I told in the first episode. When I was a kid, sometimes when my father would come home from work, he and I would walk down to the corner grocery store, not to buy groceries now, but to pick up any litter that was in the parking lot. Man, I hated doing that. What if my friends saw me picking up trash on the corner? Can you imagine the jokes? So Dad would pick up this trash with this long broomstick, had a nail on the end of it. He put it into this garbage bag that I was holding. And at some point I asked my mother, is this Dad's part-time job? She said he was just trying to beautify the neighborhood, just trying to clean up a bit. Wanted the place where we lived to be beautiful. And I think my father was on to something. That's something that any of us can do, whether it's in our personal or professional lives. My artistic neighborhood is classical music. I walk the streets of classical music every day. And we all know that classical music in America isn't the most inclusive of art forms. So in this podcast, we're going to try and create something more inclusive, something more beautiful for all of us. We'll share some stories and perspectives and music.
Yeah.
So you can hear what I mean, you know. I mean, this is going to be in part a first-person journey that we're going to be on with you as you, I guess, clean up the narrative. Talk about that a little bit. Like, why?
So while I was picking up trash on the corner, I was also learning to play piano in church. And my parents wanted me to play piano in church because we had all these kids in our Sunday school with all this energy. And my father said, well, you know, if this boy learns how to play piano, he can get these kids together and they may have some musical talent and they can, hone their gifts. And so I did that. And my mother used to always say, as I became a teenager and got a little better at it, she would say, you never know who's going to walk in church on Sunday morning and what they're going through. So use your music to minister to somebody. Wow. Just don't get up there playing anything. And so I wanted my friends to come to church also. I had played in this little band. We had a little garage band. And so I wanted to try to, weave in some music that we heard on the radio and, things that would entice my friends to come to church. But it was all about bringing people together. People I knew, people I didn't know, use music to bring people together and to uplift somebody's spirit. That's sort of how I grew up with music. And then after I became, started playing like little recitals and went to school for music, I would always try to get my friends to come. They're like, nah, man, no, that's not for me. And I'm like, oh man, Franz Liszt is cool. Wait till I tell you this story. When I introduce the music, I tell you this story, and just trying to entice my friends to come and support what I was doing, but it was always an uphill journey. And so after, I started in radio, I got a chance to think about it more deeply and to look at the scene, because now it was my work. Whenever I would go to a classical concert or, occasionally an opera, you would not see a wide swath of what America looks like. And, so I started thinking about it. I started researching it. And that led me to this idea of, well, maybe I need to look back at opera, because I remember a professor saying to me at Morehouse, he said, I do most of my singing in Europe because in America, nobody wants, black man hugging a white woman on no stage, especially down here down south. I went to Morehouse, so he was saying that about Georgia. And so, that just stuck with me. And when we started thinking about this podcast, or me doing more documentaries, it was based on a letter that I got from a listener who said, go back to where you came from and take William Grant Still with you. And I was like, Cleveland? What is he talking about?
What's Cleveland got to do with it?
It's like Mississippi? How do you know my parents were from Mississippi? And Grant Still was from Mississippi. And he said, your culture is inferior to mine. And so, our staff at QXR wasn't happy about it, man. And so we thought, we have to do something about this. We don't want to be a haven for people with ideas, supremacist ideas. We don't want to be a safe space for that. We want to create a station that embraces all of New York's culture, all of the classical, styles that are a part of our city and the people that are part of the city. And so we started to diversify our playlist a little bit more and try to, make that kind of person uncomfortable. And so the podcast and all of my documentaries are an extension of that, making stories and telling stories we told the story of Florence Price back, 13 years ago. We told the story of Hazel Scott, who was so important in Harlem, and, music in the life of Dr. King. It's just so many stories that really, hopefully, bring our people, together.
And I appreciate them on a personal level because, as somebody who is a casual fan of both opera and classical, I've learned a lot listening to your documentaries about what I need to know about my people and their history in this space. So thank you. The title is a play, or is part of the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing," "Every Voice" with Terrance McKnight.
Yeah.
Why that title? What?
Again, it goes back to church. I had a show on QXR a few years ago called All Ears. So it was that idea of being an inclusive, everybody, something for everyone, all. And so when we came to this title, Ed Yim, our VP for content for QXR, said, "Terrance, what do you think about every voice? Lift every voice." I was like, "Well, lifting, man, that sounds like a lot. Sounds like a mandate." And so we settled on every voice, and I think it encompasses, everything that we're trying to accomplish in the show.
And the first season is looking at Blackness in opera.
Yes.
And as you said, that's where you're so starting with opera.
Right.
Why there? Why is that the place to start?
Opera is a very expensive art form, and I thought if we go back to opera, you're talking early 1600s, and it sort of mirrors the Atlantic slave trade. And so you start thinking about the folks who invested in the trade had to be entertained by something. So their entertainment had to match their politics, one would think. So I wanted to investigate that and look at how they were, crystallizing these ideas about Blackness in their entertainment. And that's why we started with opera. And in this series, we're starting with Mozart. And we're going to go and look at Shakespeare's Othello as composed by Verdi later, but Shakespeare wrote it in 1590s or so. And so we're looking at these stories that have these Black characters. I can talk a little bit about Monostatos if you'd like.
Well, yeah. Well, we're about to get there. I mean,
okay.
Hold one moment. We're going to get to Monostatos. We're going to get there. Crowd favorite. We do have, because we're going to hear some music. We have a soprano with us today who's going to sing an aria from the Magic Flute, Mozart's
That's right.
Magic Flute. The first four episodes of the season deal with the Magic Flute. And this character is Pamina.
Yes.
And so let's start there for those of us who are not familiar with this story. Who is Pamina and what does she represent?
Pamina, she is the daughter of Queen of the Night. She is being held captive by a man named Sarastro, who in many productions around the world has been played by this bass right here, Kevin Maynard. He's played Sarastro. Yes. So Sarastro is keeping Pamina because he thinks that her mother is a bad influence. He's trying to protect her from her mother. Now, the man that he has watching over her is a fellow named Monostatos, who is the Black character in the opera. Well, Pamina is described as a beautiful princess, and Monostatos says she's white, and white is beautiful. And Pamina doesn't even look at Monostatos, She falls for a prince, a guy named Tamino. And when she thinks that, love is impossible for her, she sings this beautiful aria. And regardless of how she looks, when you hear this aria, I think you understand why Monostatos may have had some affection for her.
Okay. Well, we are going to hear it. Soprano Asha Lindsay is a native of Washington Heights. She's a graduate of New England Conservatory in Boston and received her master's in opera studies in Vienna, Austria at the University for Music and Performing Arts. Her career took off in Europe, and now she's back in New York City and to continue her musical journey. And joining her at the piano is going to be Kyle Walker, who is a member of the piano faculty at NYU Steinhardt and the Kaufman Center. He is a frequent collaborator with composers including Vijay Iyer, Jeffrey Scott, and Tanya Leon. Please welcome them to the stage. Soprano Asha Lindsay and pianist Kyle Walker with an aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute. Wow. We're well, now we're done. That's it. There's nothing else. We're gonna hear another aria actually in just a few minutes from Monastistos. So buckle up. But first, let's invite the show's executive producer, Tony Phillips, up here to join the conversation. Tony, come on up. Tony.
Yeah, thanks. Following that, yeah, as you say, Terrance.
Die. Can you put what we've just heard in some context for us?
Well, the only context I have for that was it was beautiful. And actually, a lot of the time I've been working on this with Terrance, I keep going back to one moment when I was about 10. I was born in England. My parents came from the Caribbean and came to England in the late 50s. And my mother, who brought 4 boys up, she kind of insisted in the gentlest way possible that we all take up a musical instrument. And I got all the instruments from I'm the youngest of 4, so I got all their cast-off instruments. And the instrument that I actually quite liked playing was the clarinet. And so I started to play. And the school had a little orchestra. And I joined the orchestra. But I was also a really keen soccer player. And the thing that keeps coming back is that on this one occasion, there was a clash with the orchestra meeting and a big soccer game. And so as a 10-year-old, I was thinking, well, how do I do this? And I remember going to see the music teacher and saying to him during the day, listen, I've got this soccer match after school, and I know there's orchestra practice, so I might have to leave early. And he kind of said, oh, okay then. Okay. So I was thinking I'm in the clear. But at the end of school, I went to the changing rooms, and I had my school tie on, and my blazer, and my white shirt, and my clarinet. But the bottom half, getting ready for the soccer match, I had my shorts on, my socks, my shin pads, and my football boots, my cleats. So I came a couple of minutes late to the orchestra and clicked my way through, knocking over music stands, and he just looked at me, because I looked ridiculous in his eyes, but I wanted to be at both. And I sat down ready to play, and I realized everybody was staring at me, like, what are you doing? You look like a clown. And so he said to me, you look more ready for football than music. And then he went to the door, and he opened the door, and he asked me to leave. Oh, no. And so that keeps coming back, that actually, that was a really heartless thing to do. And I regret leaving music, because I never went back to the orchestra.
Oh, wow.
I was a really good footballer, though. I never went back, and I've always regretted that. And so every time I joined Terrance and the amazing production team of researchers that Terrance put together, I'm reliving the joy that I had of playing the clarinet as a young boy before I was thrown out. And when I listen to Asha sing like that, I'm very close to tears, to be honest. It was so humbling.
And we're going to get to Monastistos, but given that story, Terrance, just in terms of your aspirations for this work, in terms of making space for a young Tony to feel like he could come back, is that part of this work?
That'll probably be an offshoot of the work. I think about just musically what Mozart accomplished in that song that just had us so arrested. It was, just gorgeous music. And by contrast, what he writes for monostatos, who is expressing a very similar emotion, demonstrates the kind of thing while we're creating this podcast, because he takes this man's emotion and makes fun of it. He makes light of it. And, if we didn't live with the legacy of this, I wouldn't bother having the conversation. But I think many of us, it's not all race specific, but sometimes when you're not seen because of one reason or another, what impacts you differently or deeply is made light of in certain situations. When you're in a minority, that's made, oh, just get over it, that sort of attitude. One of the actors or the singers that we interviewed for this podcast, who sings the role of monostatos, he says that he understands monostatos. And I want you all to hear this clip. His name is Rodel Rossell. He's Filipino, and he sings the role of monostatos, and he says it's very personal for him. Where's that clip?
I'm someone who is gay and Asian, so I'm already different to begin with. And I think it helps to connect with the character that way. For the longest time, I've always wished I was not what I am. But over the years growing up, learning more about how deep being a person of color is, then I realized, I'm really glad that I am what I am. Because I have something to say, I have something to talk about. And with this character, playing it, I'm able to put my own twist or my own interpretation of how do I make my character be the character that was written, but at the same time, connect with people. And I think that's what I was able to do every time I come out.
I started this podcast, I didn't know who this man was. I had no intention of connecting with this human being. But once we started talking, I saw how important this conversation was for him to talk about why he plays this role and how meaningful it is. He went on to tell me about an organization that he's a part of. It's an Asian opera alliance that he's a part of. And we just bonded over this very human desire to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. And so when you ask about, will it impact the lives of younger musicians? I don't know, but I think, when you try to do the right thing, when you try to help somebody, when you try to minister to somebody, you don't have to worry about how it's gonna, roll out. You don't have to worry about the ripple effects. You just try to do the work that's ahead of you and do it with some love and some compassion and some empathy. And that's what we're doing.
We're gonna hear an aria, but just to make sure we've level set here on this character,
yes,
right? Because we keep referring to him and the way that he's treated in this, when the way Mozart has written him. Introduce folks who have not previously met monostatos.
Monostatos. He is the chief of the slaves, and he sings about, he's interested in Pamina, and she won't pay him any attention. He says, well, it's because I'm black and black is ugly. And I read that text and I said, I've got my promo. This is gonna be my promo for the show because this is gonna grab everybody's attention, And so I'm riding around and I'm playing the promo in my car and I had my kid in the back. And as soon as I played it, I said, I can never play that again because I don't want her to get those words in her mind. And I called Tony, I said, man, we gotta switch up on this promo. And he said, you know what, man, you're right, because my daughter, she heard the promo and she kind of raised her eyebrow. And I said, how many kids have heard those words? The opera was played 100 times in the first year of production in Austria. How many kids, how many adults walked away thinking that? And, there were probably only, a few dozen people of African descent living in Vienna at the time, so they didn't see them regularly. But when they did, that just clicked, you know? And so that became a part of, you know, the thinking. And it spread like wildfire. When it came to New York in the 1830s, you know, man, there were about 15,000 free black folks living here. And you had, you know, white actors, you know, as Negro slaves, you know, and these slaves were at risk of being, or these free black folks were at risk of being arrested, kidnapped, and sold into slavery. It was a huge slave market. And so to put this out, you know, in public, that's who these people were, you know, so not only was Monostatos cast as being ugly, he, you know, in the opera, he does his job, you know, and he gets beaten just for kicks, just because he could. Just because Sarastro could, you know, give him a beat down. He did, just to show his superiority and authority. And then, you know, other stereotypes. You know, Monostatos and the band of slaves, they're doing a very important job, and then some music comes on, and they get so carried away with the music. This should sound familiar. They get so carried away with the music, they forget what they're doing. Just the rhythm of the music just carries them away. Oof. There's an article online somewhere that says, "Don't ask Terrance McKnight to dance because he won't." And I did that article probably about 7 years ago, and it was because I thought about this. Growing up, my father didn't really allow us to dance. And I remember my uncles telling stories about being in Mississippi. And they would say, you know, white folks would come up, you know, if black folks were gathered sometime, and they say, N-word dance. And if you didn't dance, they pull out their pistol. You know, shoot at the ground, dance, boy. And so all of that stuff comes back to me as I'm reading these stories, you know, and I like to say about the show, we bring from the stage into the streets where we all live and work and try to love together. So these stories are important for me to tell so, you know, we understand the legacy and we're able to, you know, look at these works and perhaps make some adjustments or understand them for what they are in the context. You know, Mozart didn't have much of a choice. He couldn't write about some, you know, Negroes being free. That would have been shut down, man, immediately, because there were operas that depicted free Africans, but they didn't last around 1800. They were shut down. So this was a sign of the times, and I think we can take this, and what I'm trying to do is take it and use it as a teaching moment.
I think what you're going to hear as well, certainly in the podcast, what you're going to hear, Kai, is, and Terrance is understating this, but I'll tell you what he's doing with us as a production team and every person that we've interviewed. What he does is create an enormous amount of space for people to talk and tell their story. And what he's doing, I didn't think it was quite possible to open up enough space for Monostatos to be seen as a fully rounded human being, because it's such a crude caricature. But actually, I think, as you'll hear in the podcast, certainly through Rodell and others, there is a human being there. And I think a lot of it is down to Terrance just kind of creating this space, and people are walking in and they're telling stuff that we don't normally hear.
Well, let us finally hear from Monostatos. Our next singer is tenor Ian George. He is a multi-genre vocalist and a Harlem native with roots in Haiti and Guyana. He's a graduate of Morehouse College, where he studied voice. Ian is also a researcher on the Every Voice podcast. And joining him again at the piano is Kyle Walker. Please welcome them to the stage. The song they're going to sing, or the aria they're going to sing?
So this aria, the important piece about this aria is when Monostatos is singing this lyric that I've been talking about, and he's not to have a beautiful voice. He's supposed to be, you know, just a little ragged around the edges. The text is on the screen.
Alles fühlt der Liebe Freuden, schwebelt tender Herzen küsst. Und die zu die Liebe meiden, weil ein Schwarze hässlich ist, weil ein Schwarze hässlich ist. Ist mir denn kein Herz gegeben? Ich bin auch den Mädchen gut. Ich bin auch den Mädchen gut. Immer Honor, Weibchen lieben, weil ich Höllenblut, weil ich Höllenblut, weil ich Höllenblut. Drum, so will ich, weil ich lebe, schweben, küssen, selig sein. Lieber guten Mann, vergebe, einer Weiße nahm mich ein, einer Weiße nahm mich ein. Weiß ich schön, ich muss sie küssen, Mond verstärke dich dazu, Mond verstärke dich dazu. Soll das dich zu sehr verließen, oh so mach die Augen zu, oh so mach die Augen zu, oh so mach die Augen zu.
Tenor Ian George and pianist Kyle Walker. Before we shift gears, Tony, just to talk a little bit about the work of the podcast itself. First off, I mean, did you know this character before you started working on this?
No.
I mean, how
No,
did you?
I vaguely knew that famous Queen of the Night aria, but I knew nothing, really. The most I learned was when Terrance emailed that to me one day. And I think I was driving, and I had to pull over, because I couldn't quite believe what I was reading. So no, I didn't know it, but, you know, a lot of my work has always been about, you know, trying to explore the kind of historical context and the sociological context behind stories. So I knew that we were going to do this, but I didn't realize that that was actually what was being sung. So
Did that shift something for you?
Overdrive, I just desperately wanted to know more. And I spent about a year, in 2005, 2006, I worked with a pianist and a conductor called Daniel Barenboim. Some people here will know of Barenboim, not everybody will. But Barenboim is a kind of superstar pianist and musician. And I did a lecture series with him. And the kind of heart of his lecture series really focused on an orchestra that he'd set up with Edward Said, his friend. And it's called the East-West Divan Orchestra, and it's made up of Israeli kids and Arab kids. And they play music together. And so for him, the orchestra, any orchestra, is a kind of instrument where people have to come together and listen. They have to listen to each other. And Barenboim framed it as this. He said that you have to listen to the narrative of the other. And in some cases, he said, like this orchestra, you might have to listen to the narrative of your perceived enemy. Perceived. And so the listening is the most important thing. And so when you get something like this, when you meet a character like, when you're introduced to a character like Monostatos, you want to listen and you want to get to know how this character functions, because you also want to know what it's like for an African in Europe in the 1790s, as Terrance referenced earlier. You know, this was the peak of the transatlantic slave trade. And there may not necessarily have been plantations on European soil, but they were all deeply embedded.
Indeed.
And benefited immensely to this day. So you want to know more. So you want to listen to that voice. You want to listen to those narratives. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, clap for that.
Thank you.
Tony Phillips is the executive producer of Every Voice with Terrance McKnight. Thanks for coming up with us, Terrance.
Thank you.
And we're going to shift gears a little and learn about some contemporary opera being composed in Atlanta. Dr. Sharon Willis is the founder of AmeriCorps Opera Alliance. She has written 16 operas and a number of plays that center on Black American characters. Their stories range from The Only Black Passenger on the Titanic to an opera on the life of Madam C.J. Walker from my hometown, Indianapolis, the first woman to be a self-made millionaire, to biblical stories about the seduction of King Solomon. Dr. Willis is based in Atlanta, but she is thankfully joining us in New York tonight to talk about her work. Please welcome Sharon Willis. Dr. Willis, do you remember your introduction to Monastistos?
Yes, I actually played Pamino. And the guy that was playing it was a white guy in blackface. And as beautiful as Eon's voice was, or is, this guy had a beautiful tenor voice, but he made it as nasal and as ugly as he could make it, and as creepy as he could make it as he stood over me in that role. But what I found interesting is that the backdrop actually on this particular production was Egypt, because you have these type of Masonic rituals, and all of the things that they did represented that. So I'm saying, how do you get that shade of ugliness in that sense up against a backdrop of Egypt? Then you say, but this is that white culture that's putting themselves as superior over the darkness of Egyptians. You revise it to fit the mode. So yes, I have had that experience.
What I loved about meeting you in Every Voice is that I immediately thought, oh, wonderful, I'm going to hear from somebody who is writing something new, who is writing a different story for Black people in this space. And tell me about the origin of that. When did you decide to focus on Black characters in your operas?
For me, it was a culmination of everything that I had been. When I was a child, my first talent was a storyteller. I was this remarkable storyteller. I had such a great imagination that I imagined that I could play the piano, and I could not. And there was a talent show when I was about 13. I looked like I was about 11. And the talent show, you have these day programs, and at the end of the 2 weeks during the summer, we still have camps like that. The lady that was in charge said, is there anybody that can dance? And people raised their hand. Is anybody can sing? And then he asked, is there anyone that can play the piano? Don't know what possessed me, but I raised my hand. I just thought that God was going to strike my finger. And my aunt was sitting out there in the audience, and when they said, now we will have a piano selection from Sharon Willis, I went proudly to that old upright that was flush to the wall, and the audience was just as they are here. And I went out, and I used to watch the Ed Sullivan Show, and of course Lawrence Welk, because that's what my aunt watched. I went over to the piano, and I looked up, and I said, God, you're ready, I'm ready. And after I sat there about 15 seconds, nothing happened, and I knew, okay, the gig is up, so I started hitting any note. And when I finished, I timidly got up and took my little bow, and people were elbowing. But I was a child, so it was forgivable, except for the aunt that was sitting out there, and I embarrassed her, and she did some Sunday school words that I can't say here. But She said, what in the blankety blank possessed you was her word. So they got there and act like a fool that you could play. But from that, her friend, my godfather, said, don't punish her. Let me find her. If she's that foolish, let me find a piano teacher.
Right, if you are that bold, this is somebody who has got a talent.
He found me a piano teacher, and in a year I learned to play.
Yes.
And I became the Sunday school teacher, pianist for that year after I became about 15. But to answer your question more directly, I know I then went all the way around America to say this. To most people when they celebrate 50, because that is a remarkable milestone to say that I've got to be 50 years old, because when you're in your teens, you think 50 is just over the hill, and you don't realize that it isn't. It's if we're living to be 100, some of us, that's just halfway through. I did not want to have a birthday bash. I wanted something that was going to represent legacy for me, because I grew up in Atlanta in the Black experience, in that Mecca, even though I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I left there when I was about 10, and all of my other relatives were in the South. I wanted something that was going to be special, a culminating activity that would represent what have I done with 50 years of living. And it said, why don't you write an opera? I had no idea, just like I didn't have any idea that I could play that piano.
I love it.
I set about writing about what you know. And to that extent, I had to think about, I had this classical voice coming up. And I remember being in my church, and the young people sang in the gospel choir, and I wanted to sing in what they call the old fogey anthem choir, because that was my voice type, and I had been trained under Mr. William Revere, who was this great choral master. We did everything a cappella. We had to sight read every day of our lives, 5 days a week. And so he made us great musicians. So I wanted to sing with them, so I had to sing in both choirs. I sang gospel, but I couldn't sing gospel. I'd sing an octave above everyone else. But then in the anthem choir, I reigned supreme. So I thought, why don't I write about how difficult it is to be an opera singer, not only in the world of opera in the European style with whites, but even with my people who could not accept that. And so it was a double whammy. But I said, I'm going to write a story, and the first opera was called The Opera Singer, where I then would present the just vignettes of characters like Roland Hayes, who had a difficult time, traveled the world 7 times, never joined an opera company because he would not be accepted. And I ended with this story called Cicciaretta, who was a vaudeville singer, trained, but they wouldn't even let her have her own name. They called her the Black Patty, after Adelina Patti, an Italian-American. She couldn't even have her own name because that just was not normal. If she's going to sing, it has to be in the shadow of someone else. And that was my first opera. I had no intention of writing another until a singer came up to me and said, when's the next? So what are you talking about? I'm done. 50's over. But it led me to put a mission out there. What I realized is not only did I have an opportunity to preserve and advocate and cultivate African American history and culture, and we don't live in a vacuum. So it's not that I can write that story without everybody else. I came up with this name called AmeriColor, which was supposed to be across the spectrum. And it gave opportunities to everyone, whether you were of color or not, because my stories are all encompassing. And I got that name, AmeriColor, because I was, when I was maybe 20 years old, I didn't care for pageants, but they were offering $750, and believe it or not, that was going to pay for my tuition that year. And I entered this pageant, and it was called Miss Aquarius.
You will certainly do something. You will take a notion and do something.
I will do that. I was Miss Aquarius. I sang My Man's Gone Now. I'm a lyric soprano, but I got away with it. I sang My Man's Gone Now, and walked with the little swimsuit and all of that. And then they said I was Miss Aquarius. Wow. And at the same time, they were having a contest in New York. And the people that were producing it here did not have time to have a pageant in Atlanta. And they said, well, can you send your Miss Aquarius here and represent Georgia? This will be called the Miss Americolor pageant. And I remember that, and I kept that name, and that's why I'm Americolor Opera.
Well, yes, that's right. I could sit and listen to you tell stories all night, but let's hear some of your opera. We're going to hear this is On the Wings of a Dove from the Herndon Opera.
The Herndon Opera.
Tell us about this scene before we hear it.
The Herndon Opera, of course, Alonzo Franklin Herndon married Adrienne McNeil, and we're talking about 1892. And of course, Alonzo himself had been a slave, but his master was his father. Through life, he had a hard time. Even though he was fair enough to pass for white, he refused to do that. He honored his black ancestry because his mother was a slave, and his mother's sister was also bore children for that same man. He eventually walks, after slavery, 20 miles to Jonesboro Road, learns the barbering trade, learns to become a millionaire, cutting white people's hair downtown at 66 Peachtree Street. That building still stands today. And then he marries this elegant woman who taught at Atlanta University along with Du Bois. And she's an aspiring thespian, but no one will have a black woman or anyone of color. I don't care how fair she looked. So she passes herself off as Creole or some French name, Anne Dumignon. And she goes to Washington, D.C., and she performs all these Shakespearean characters. But then she is sadly diagnosed with Addison's disease, and no one knows how to treat it. Kennedy had that, President Kennedy had that, and she dies from that. But she gets this news as she is teaching her students, and the doctor comes by. This is in the opera. This is my libretto. The doctor comes by and says, "You're not going to live much longer." Her grandmother had died a year before. So now the stage is set. She's in costume. And rather than face death in fear, she faces it with faith. But then at the same time, you might say that she's a little angry. I'm a little upset with you, God, fates. I've just turned 42 years old. I have a 12-year-old son to raise. I'm just at the beginning of my career, and you're telling me that I have less than 6 months to live? I'm building this beautiful mansion to live in, and it becomes her death chamber. And so she faces death. On the wings of a dove, I shall ascend my spirit, and that's what you hear.
Well, let's bring back soprano Asha Lindsay and pianist Kyle Walker.
Yes.
This is On the Wings of a Dove from the Herndon Opera.
I who have just begun to
was On the Wings of a Dove from the opera The Herndons, sung by Asha Lindsay with pianist Kyle Walker. Breathtaking. Terrance, what does Dr. Willis's work mean for you? Having done all this research about the representation of Black people in the past in opera, what's her work mean for you now?
Well, it means more for me now than it did when I first encountered it. Because when I first encountered her work, I was, in school, and again, you always want people to kind of see what you're up to, Oh, you're at Morehouse, you're studying music. You're at Georgia State, you're studying music. What's that like? Oh, well, come to a concert with me. So I remember going to see an opera, and I went to see Aida. I took a lady with me, and she was East African, and I was like, oh, she'll really dig this because it's Ethiopia, it's Egypt. This will be cool. And so we get there, and about 12 minutes in, she says, T, why are the Ethiopians black and the Egyptians white and the Ethiopians slaves? And I just sunk down in my seat. Like, how much am I gonna have to spend for dinner tonight to make this right? So when I found out about Sharon Willis's operas, it was like, I can go here without fear, because I know that the stories that she tells is gonna uplift our, people were just happy. They would go to her operas and they would just be standing in line, all kinds of folks, standing in line, waiting on tickets, just excited, talking ahead, like commenting during the opera. You hear a part that sounds like you could hear some amens from the audience. I mean, it just felt like home. And when the operas were over, it was always, when's the next one? Be sure to call me and tell me when the next one is. It's like, I don't know when the next one is. I don't really know Dr. Willis like
here
that.
in the audience.
But it was just that kind of feeling with her operas that people felt so at home. I mean, the musical language was familiar. The stories were uplifting. She didn't put anybody down to uplift anyone. So it was just a safe space to take people and to enjoy, a culture that, was all of ours.
What about that, Dr. Willis? Who is your audience, you think? We're all your audience, but who's coming to the operas, and what kind of space are you trying to create for them?
I'm trying to convert a lot of people who think that we are just in one or two genres. We actually can do it all. We have been given voices that sing jazz, gospel, blues, spirituals, classical. Why not? But we don't have the invitation sometimes or the exposure for younger audiences to appreciate what I'm trying to do. And not only that, there was not a lot of places where Black classical singers could come. And so I felt now it's a part of my responsibility. It's the next thing. I started off as a storyteller, then a chorister, then a pianist, and then I didn't I'm not gonna say that. I changed my major to voice, and then I wanted to be this opera singer because I love Leontine Price. There was no other singer but her. But I realized I'm not gonna be that. So what's left for me? I'm a composer.
Well, we don't know that yet.
No.
Given your record, you might still be.
Well, no. Well, that's right. I could get on a stage and just say that. But I get more joy out of helping other people find opportunities of performance. I see Terrance McKnight doing the same thing. A door is opening for him, and then he's inviting people like me. When I told him, I thanked him for the opportunity, but I said, it's not for me. You're opening a space for people like me, composers, women composers, Asian composers. It's all of us. It's AmeriColor. It's all of our history. And I feel blessed to have the opportunity to create. And I think that's why the blessings have been given to me, because I'm not that selfish. I say to my friends, if I won $1 billion, I'm going to give it away. I am not going out there buying 10 houses here, 10 cars here, whatever. I'm looking for scholarships. I'm looking to help homeless. I'm looking to build schools. I'm looking to educate. That's where I would be with that money. I couldn't keep it. And both of us have that same heart. Who else can you pull along? Who else can come with you? That's how I feel about the gift given.
Yes, please. And just to fact check something, is it the case that you are still the only woman to have started an opera company?
I'm not going to say that. I can't claim that. Because there's someone else that has an opera company, but I always introduce it by saying, I am the only woman, I say composer in the United States, to have founded an opera company and been its principal composer. There's some that own companies, but you're doing somebody else's music. And it's not that I have not done what I call portrait scenes. I've done portraits of Pamina, the magic flute. I have done Cosi fan tutte. I have done portraits of Porgy and Bess. But my singer said, no, we've done that. We want what you do because you're addressing us. We feel that you're talking about and uplifting, like Terrance McKnight said, you're uplifting our history. But it's not just African American history. It's American history. I wrote about the Candlers. I don't know whether you know about the Candlers who invented the Coca-Cola company. But after I had done La Roche, they were so grateful that I had come. They said, well, would you consider writing about the Candlers? I'm thinking, what struggles have white people had?
Let alone the founders of Coca-Cola.
But the founders of Coca-Cola. Here is an English guy or British subject wanting to marry an Irish commoner. No, that was just like marrying a black person. No, you can't. And she's Catholic, and you are, Protestant. And so the family denounced him because he married her. They leave their country and come to America. And 3 generations later, Asa Candler would buy the Coca-Cola formula from John Pemberton. And the rest is history. He becomes a millionaire. And the house that is there, the Candler House, is where we performed many of our operas. And so I wrote that story about 3 of those characters. And so that was a Candler story. I've also written about breast cancer. I've written about health issues. I write plays about autism or Alzheimer's. Anything that I think that will bring sensitivity, exposure, educating. It doesn't matter because it involves us all. It just so happens that I know more about African American history than I would do anyone else. So yes, I uplift that subject.
Well, as our final selection tonight, we're going to hear another aria from one of your operas. This one is from Three Kings and a Prince, based on the Christmas story. Is the Bible an inspiration for a lot of your work?
Well, I've written The Seduction of King Solomon. And yes, I had the belly dancers and all of that on stage. But this one here is, when I think about Christmas operas, you always think about Amal and the Night Visitors. And I remember that when it was premiered on PBS or wherever it was, and I was just fascinated with that. And so I wanted to write a little Christmas opera too. You talk about these 3 kings, and I always spelled the kings with lowercase letters, and I spelled the prince with uppercase letters. We never see the baby. It's really a comedy about these 3 kings and their servants on their way. But when Joseph is turned away from all these innkeepers, which is really hilarious, but there's a serious moment that he's so frustrated he cannot find a place for his espoused wife to have this child. And so you hear the desperation in his voice when he asks God, hear my prayer. Don't you hear me knocking at doors? Have not I been obedient to you? Please, God, hear my prayer.
Let's bring back tenor Ian George and pianist Kyle Walker for a performance of Heavenly Father from Three Kings and a Prince by Sharon Willis. Ian George and pianist Kyle Walker performing Heavenly Father from Sharon Willis's opera, Three Kings and a Prince. And Terrance, as we wrap up, I understand you would like to introduce us to some of the folks who have done some incredible work on this podcast. You want to introduce the team behind this work?
Absolutely. This is this month I celebrate my 15th year here at New York Public Radio. And this is exactly the kind of work that I came here to do. And so we're doing it. And Ian George, who you just heard from, I just learned this a few weeks ago. Back in 2011, we brought in the Morehouse College Glee Club. They were celebrating their centenary. They were in town doing a concert, you know, they were on tour, celebrating 100 years. The Glee Club has had 3 directors in that, you know, in 110 years. So 48 members of the Glee Club came here and sang right in front of that window. And Ian was a freshman in that Glee Club. And the Glee Club director introduced me to him. He said, "Hey, he's from Harlem, just like you. He's from Harlem." And I said, "Ian, when you graduate, give me a call. When you come here for the summer, give me a call." Well, years later, he called me and said, you know, or he wrote me on LinkedIn and said, "I'm back at home. I'm out of school. If you have something of interest, let me know. I would love to work with you." And I said, "If something comes up, I will definitely reach out to you." And so I called Morehouse, and I called the chairman. I said, "Doc, you know, Dr. Brown, I got a note from Ian George. Tell me about this kid." He said, "Oh, Ian will be great for you. He whatever you need him to do, involve him. I think he'll be a good fit for whatever you're trying to do." And so now Ian is on my team. In addition, Tony Phillips, who you all have met, is on the team. Hey, why don't you all stand up? Pranati is on the team. Ariel is on the team.
Stand up, stand up.
Stand up so people can see you all. Jazz OG, she's on the team. So these are most of these folks are musicians, and they're very passionate about the work, and they have stories to tell, and we're doing the work. And so I want to thank them for just coming along on this journey with me. And, you know, I have to thank my mom, too, for giving me the mandate to try to, you know, use my music and use my talent to help somebody. You never know who's walking in, who's going to turn on that radio, who might need to hear a kind word, who might need to hear the right piece of music, and you set it up the right way. You never know. And I also have to thank my wife, who's here with me tonight. And I have to thank her because she allows Tony and Dave to live in a room in our house. They live on a Zoom screen that's on my computer all the time. Tony's there at 6 a.m. He lives in London, so it's noon for him. And he's calling me at 6 a.m. and I'm up on the thing talking to Tony, and they just stay there all the time. And she allows them to inhabit our house, and because they understand the importance of the work. And I thank Ed Yim for seeing this podcast through. I thank Lee Moritoma for inviting me to New York to do this work way back 15 years ago. I thank Matt Abramowitz, who was here. He was our program director. He helped me create those documentaries. I thank Ivan, who kept me on the right side of the law with all of my work. And I thank our listeners, because the listeners, you know, make all of this work possible.
That's right.
And the listeners write in and they talk about how they enjoy the work. And I have a feeling that when New York leads the conversation, the rest of the country and the rest of the world will follow. And so it's important that we lead this important conversation. So thank you all.
Let's also bring out our singers to thank, our performers to thank them again as well. Asha Lindsay, Ian George, and Kyle Walker. Yes, indeed. and Dr. Sharon Willis. And all of you, thanks for coming tonight. Every Voice with Terrance McKnight, it is in your podcast feeds now. Download it, tell your friends, share it. Thanks for coming.